would help to transform children's experiences. But I say no totality because one of my worries about what happens is that too often politicians, again of all parties, tend to cherry pick. And as a result, as we've seen from family group conference experience, what can be a very beneficial experience for children can end up being undermined with more burden placed on the most impoverished of relatives. Firstly, the right interventions at the right time can determine whether or not a child, including a teenager, remains in the family home. And a lot of the calls to our advice line are from parents who cannot cope with teenagers who they regard as out of control. And yet the local authority also doesn't know what to do with them. It's too often the case that we're still seeing children ending up in secure accommodation or in the youth justice system who, if they have been dealt with much earlier, and I'd say it's particularly what we're finding is delays and very high thresholds in relation to CAMS and children with mental health support. And the consequence of that is devastating. Secondly, we know that fathers, particularly non-resident fathers, are routinely being excluded from decisions about their children. They're frequently neither assessed as a resource nor as a risk. Research we've recently conducted, and it is pioneering research in this country, has found that less than half of fathers who were in touch with their child were invited to a meeting when Children's Services were undertaking the core assessment. And when we probed that further, there was not a consistent answer as to why they hadn't been. When fathers are, however, invited to meetings, 3/4 come along. Failure to involve fathers means children lose out. Indeed, I was at a conference last week in which a number of children were talking who had been abused in their mother's care. The mothers had severe mental health problems, drug addiction, and violent boyfriends. And these children were talking about their experiences. As a result of a family group conference, they were actually able to re-establish contact with their fathers and were now living safely in the protection of their dad's home. But equally, the failure to assess, particularly non-resident fathers, also means that we're placing an incredible burden on women. And particularly, given the high levels of domestic violence that we're seeing in child protection cases, in effect, what the state is doing is expecting women who are in fear of violent men to be able to single-handedly protect those children. And we still offer too little in the form of non-court mandated prevention programs for perpetrators. Instead, the emphasis is very much on the mother getting the father out of the home, and then the father goes on to create a similar situation with another woman in the future. Thirdly, we're pioneering independent professional advocacy for parents whose children are subject to child protection inquiries. An independent evaluation being launched at a seminar in June with Justice Mumby has found that families welcome the independent support received. They feel empowered by it, and it also helps them to understand the processes they're going through and what the social workers' concerns are. Professionals have also expressed confidence that it's enabled families to be able to work constructively in partnership with the local authority, which after all we know is the key determinant of whether a child is safeguarded. Our work is small scale and the future funding is very precarious, but I would encourage you to explore it. I just want to raise briefly, because I've touched on it, the issue of family and friends care. 200,000 to 300,000 children in this country are living with relatives. There isn't strong data in relation to who those children are, but they are living with relatives because they cannot live with their parents. In other relatively more children are in those circumstances than are in the care system. But they are continually overlooked by the state, by government, by politicians, by local authorities. Many of those relatives are extremely impoverished, and many of those placements are precarious because they do not receive the support they need. The assumption, for example, is that that grandparent will manage all contact. The same assumption isn't made of foster carers, for example. And yet, those grandparents may be actually having to manage their own children as well as their grandchildren and suffer considerable abuse in the process. I would say, from our perspective, if there was one thing that government should be doing differently or could be doing differently, it would be to introduce a proper support and financial package at national level with relatives who are raising children who, through court or professional judgment, cannot live with their parents. We think more children could end up living in such an arrangement safely. There's a lot of evidence now for the benefits of family and friends care, but we are also concerned that they're being seen as a cheap option, and that the increase will start to see people in situations where the child isn't protected because they're not properly supported. And I just point out that there's a Grandparents Plus are launching today a report and a survey, and one of the findings in it was that only 1% of parents said that if anything should happen to them, would they want the state to care for their child. All others said they wanted either a relative or friend to do so, and that's, that's the experience of us all. I just want to make one other short point, and that is about court fees. And I'm not talking here about public court fees, I'm talking now about private court fees, because there is a proposal that private court fees should increase in effect so that they pay for themselves. And our real concern is that will have a devastating effect in relation to family and friends care placements. Because at the moment, what is happening is, and I will take as an example, a sibling carer whose parents had died was very much encouraged by the local authority to take on the care of her younger brother. She wanted the child to be able to go to actually cremation in India, had to have a passport. The child didn't have a passport, so she was told she had to get a residence order for that child, encouraged by the local authority, but the local authority did not pay for that residence order application. She ended up doing that. She didn't even know that she was able to ask the local authority. And a review we've done of family and friends care policies across the country shows that it is almost impossible for carers to work out what their local authority policies are in relation to legal assistance. If court fees goes up for those carers, what we will end up with is carers not being able to afford to do it, and we will end up with more children living in more precarious arrangements. So as a last sort of parting gesture, I would just want to raise that, because I think it's an area that we need to lobby about and bring to public attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I think the passion you convey, I think is an excellent way of starting the conference. We've come here today, many of us, with a passion for, about what's happening and wanting things to change. It's good to hear the issues that you raised. Now, are there any points of clarification?